Welcome to Hail Varsity Radio, the voice of Husker Nation. Insight, opinion, expertise, with the biggest and best names talking Nebraska across the state. Join the show on Twitter at Hail Varsity and at Schmitz_radio. Call in at 402-466-ESPN or 1-800-825-5865. Here's Chris Schmitz.
Welcome to it. Great to be with you on a Monday. Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbal, and you. We've got a sit down with Husker standout and the good doctor, Rob Zatechka, will be with us. We'll talk to him about the future of college football, sports in general, as you've had a number of college football programs experience positive tests from COVID-19. What's Dr. Rob Zatechka think? Also, he's kind of an expert on the offensive line. Get his take on Nebraska's right tackle spot, the left guard fight for that job, and really where Farniak kind of fits in at the right guard spot. That's what we'll step into in hour one. Charlie McBride, Mondays with Charlie. Mr. Blackshirt in 1 hour. And then Derek Peterson from HailVarsity.com and magazine going to be with us. Derek, some great stuff here when it comes to personnel decisions being considered here before fall camp. And we'll get into him about McCaffrey and the quarterback spot. Numbers to get in, 466-3776, 466-3776, 800-825-5865. Find us on Twitter, Chris Schmidt at Schmidt_radio, or Elijah Herbal at Herbal Essence, and email Chris at HailVarsity.com. We'll spend some time on NASCAR, Bubba Wallace, and that atrocity that happened to him with the noose being left in his garage. Dak Prescott also on our radar with what Dallas is going to do. Good weekend, Elijah. Lots of balls and strikes. I got games in with Junior and the Lincoln A's youth baseball. They'll knock the rust off, and we'll get back at it next weekend. But it was great to be sitting outside, spread away from people, obviously, but in the sun watching youth baseball. I know you were excited to call balls and strikes. You got to ump this weekend.
Yeah, I actually wish I got some more games because Sunday afternoon I was on call for the umpiring because there's so many there's so much severe weather in the forecast this weekend.
We could have used you game 2 Saturday.
Didn't like the balls and strikes?
Well, my problem is Junior, he got the start, which was awesome. Mm-hmm. But as soon as he throws this. Well, it's a hanger and banger ball when he gets older. It's got a little break to it, or it's a changeup. And, Pedro Serrano may be able to hit this curveball. But it was dancing around, and as soon as he kind of gets this from me, as soon as something doesn't go his way, his face will crunch up. I mean, it's a loud advertisement worn on his face and his sleeve that he's not happy. And so he wasn't giving the ump any guff, but his mannerisms, his body language was garbage. We had a friendly, and I mean friendly, I didn't scream at him. We had a chat about the body language thing. But how are you that way? If some kid's kind of mean mugging you, not getting an outside corner or a ball that floated in, how do you handle that? Do you kind of mentally keep that in the back of your mind?
There's two different reactions a pitcher can go to. If a pitcher looks mad at himself because he barely missed a pitch, it's okay. It's when he starts doing the hands up, the shrug of the shoulders, what's going on
here?
He
didn't quite go Louisville left-hand relief pitcher.
See, I can understand a pitcher being frustrated whenever it's just barely outside or just barely high. I can understand that. It's whenever I know it's a ball and he's trying to complain or he's giving me the body language where he thinks it's a strike. Then on those close pitches, you might not get it. Mm-hmm. You might not get on the close one just because that batter's had good body language. He takes the strikes just fine. But whenever you get a close ball, you're mad at me.
He carried his body language issue over to at the dish. The calls he wasn't getting as a pitcher, the other pitcher got on him as he went 0-2 real quick in the box. So, no, listen, you live and learn. It's all good. I know you were happy to be out for baseball, and I was happy to get there. So let's spend some time on football here, and a really good article by Max Olson of The Athletic. We'll talk with Mitch Sherman tomorrow. And we are seeing COVID numbers spike up. That's what we're going to spend time with Rob Zatechka, Dr. Rob, on here in about 15 minutes. And you've seen Clemson's numbers jump to 20-plus overall. LSU, the report was 30 kids. Closer to home, you have about 15 players from Kansas State. And so far, so good for Nebraska, right? Nebraska's been able to start earlier than a lot of programs with the voluntary workouts. Now, there's not a daily update on who's sick, who's not. That's not coming out from Nebraska. But I think if it got bad, something you would hear about it. As much media that covers Nebraska football, somebody would say something. And, how's Nebraska going about their business when it comes to their voluntary workouts? And it's gonna happen in college football. You're going to see more and more infections because of the closeness in the vicinity. And all it can take is one asymptomatic teammate that maybe he was or she was out at the grocery store and not covered up. Maybe he or she was stopping out to eat somewhere. And I'm not saying to lock in. I'm not telling you to lock down. I don't want that. But it comes down to choices you make, and are you smart with the social distancing? Are you smart with who you're hanging around with? And what's your priority? Nebraska's got a lot of guys, as we talk here Monday afternoon, man, they want to play ball. They got a bad taste in their mouth for last season. The commitment level. You still can be a kid. You can still be a college student. But what's your commitment level? And this is where K-State's coach kind of called out the kids that tested positive. So just to recap Saturday, K-State put out a statement. They paused all voluntary football workouts. And this isn't to get in line in Pinata, Kansas State. It can and it will happen to other programs, okay? Because you do want to go live, right? You want to go live and do your thing. But you have 2 weeks of paused workouts, and they're going to have another round of retesting as a number of players tested positive, and that number continues to rise. So 14 student athletes have now tested positive for COVID-19. That was as of Friday. 14 players self-quarantined, self-isolating for at least 10 days, while the rest of the teammates now must quarantine and wait to restart their prep for 2020. So this is a major challenge in college football across the country, and Paul Feinbaum is wondering, and I think this is kind of how we felt Friday going into the weekend when you look at Clemson, when you look at LSU, when you look at Kansas State and Little Apple's a couple hours away, 2.5 hours away, big programs and programs within our region. How bad are the numbers going to get? And will we still get a football season? 2 weeks ago, we felt pretty good about having college football. Is that still a reality? Paul Feinbaum commented on that this morning.
So far, it's been very disappointing. The ones who are being transparent are making the lead story on ESPN every afternoon and morning. The ones who aren't are underground somewhere. But I think it's time for there to be more. I mean, this is a critical situation. You can't keep this within. And by the way, most of this will get out because these players are texting back and forth with buddies at other schools. So it won't be down low for long. And the real problem, I think, for college football is stemming this negativity. It's not over yet. Every AD is saying the right thing, but do they really believe it? Some of the ones I'm beginning to hear from really don't believe it any longer, although they're communicating it publicly. We're going to play football. Are we, though?
That's a fair question. And you have policies crafted by the CDC when it comes to reintroducing players into facilities. The next step, you got to ensure a group of 100 comply with the rules. And there are obstacles to those rules. And you had a Zoom meeting with Chris Kleiman. It was mandatory. A Zoom meeting with players and parents Wednesday to warn them that a small group of players jeopardized the plan for a safe return to campus and football activities. You had the Athletic speak with 3 parents of K-State players. They spoke on the condition of anonymity because of the sensitivity of the matter. 2 parents who said they attended the meeting were told that Kansas State was experiencing a spike in positive tests and that 55 football players needed to be retested. You have the 15%, and they've been able to identify due to contact tracing. In less than a week, you have the program that went from 0 to 8, now to 14. They're not going to resend these kids scholarships, but what happened is you had a group of guys end up going to a party. They went to a party. It's a lot like you hear someone goes to a nightclub. They don't feel that great, or maybe they don't know that they have it, and bang, they infect 30 people. What guidelines are you prepared to follow? How disciplined are you going to be as a student athlete, or just as a normal person on the street? I mean, that's a fair question here. Kansas State's a small community, and the timeline is this. You had K-State instructed to return to campus June 1st. You quarantine for 2 weeks. You begin your voluntary workouts June 15th, and then they're tested after 7 days of quarantining. All right. On June 11th, you had the school announce that they tested approximately 90 student athletes. The issue was you had players that were part of a large group that attended 2 off-campus parties last weekend, which might have spread the virus to additional teammates. And Coach Kleinman's like, man, the 15%, that's the frustration part, because you weren't doing what you're supposed to be doing. And we're all sick of being locked up or being cautious. I know we are. But you see on social media, different Nebraska fans are like, hey, dude, if you want college football, wear a mask. All right, protect yourself and protect others. I'm not telling you to wear a mask. I'm just saying, look what happened down at Kansas State, because a couple of dudes, don't know how many for sure, went to an off-campus party, and bang, now you have 15 of your teammates, maybe more, test positive.
And you hit it the nail on the head, is that if you want college football back, you got to start protecting yourself, because whenever the numbers start jumping up, it's only bound to affect sports. I mean, you see what's happening down in the South, where the South's numbers have spiked in the past month, and it's hitting all those college football programs down there now as well. So it's the second wave. We've been hearing that for months, where they're like, well, we got to flatten the curve, and then you got to prevent the second wave. And it feels like this is the second wave starting to hit the country. I'm no expert, but that's what it feels like to me. And it feels dangerous in terms of sports coming back here soon. I mean,
doesn't it feel like we're teetering? And I hate to go there today, because you and I are just talking about, hey, we finally got out. You got to umpire. I got to watch my kid play baseball. Are we going to be able to see sport? Because we want it so bad. I want to cover the Nebraska team again this year, and I want to see football. I don't want to see athletes, though, put in danger either because of money. And Laura Rutledge from ESPN chimed in. There is a concern. You heard and saw this hold on a minute type mentality from UCLA. A number of kids from UCLA that they didn't feel that Chip Kelly or the UCLA program may have their best interest in mind. They wanted a third party there to make sure all the protocols were dotted and crossed. The other side of this, I mean, with LSU, I mean, you've got 30 players quarantining right now. They tested positive because they visited local bars. And, man, you get back to campus, you want to kind of get back into normalcy, but it's just dangerous to go out and not social distance.
And like, even beyond just the activities within a team that can spread it, a lot of these guys are living together. Mm-hmm. They're renting out houses in Lincoln. They're, staying at the same apartments. They could even be staying with different athletes of different sports. So how quickly it can spread through an athletic department, it's scary. And that's why I think it's teetering, is because we're seeing that within a week, you can go from 0 people testing positive to 20 on a team.
You think you're safe. You think you're okay. Things are opening up. The restrictions are easing. Let's go out and spend some money. Let's help a local business. I mean, we went out last night for Father's Day, but the place we went out to had, I don't know, maybe one family to a row of booths. We had to wear a mask to get in. Had a temperature swab. I mean, we still went out, but we were very safe about it. Hand sanitizer, washing our hands. The poor waitress and waitresses, I mean, they are hazmat suited up, just trying to do their job. I mean, it's not ideal, but you've just got to choose. Do you want to play ball? And that means maybe cracking a beer at home with your teammates versus going out to a campus party or going out to a bar down at LSU.
And the scary thing to me is we don't even have competition yet between teams.
Oh.
What happens whenever there's an asymptomatic left guard who spreads it to the entire other defensive line, who then they're asymptomatic for a week and a half, and they spread it to all their teammates, who then spread it to a whole other team? It can spread very quickly once the competition starts opening back up, and that's very scary in terms of getting sports back.
Right. I mean, it could be rampant and just kind of cut through, and then you're off for 2 weeks and quarantining, and who else has it? And I think we'll still get football. We still can't put in ink what it looks like. Do we have time for Rutledge? Rutledge, her commentary here on just the concern from a lot of college football players out there.
I'm hearing that there are many more cases that we don't know about, and that's to be expected. But I think this is more widespread and maybe a larger volume of cases than people even realize within college football. It's interesting, too, because you brought up that UCLA story. I'm getting much more of a sense of concern from some of the players that I'm talking to that wasn't there even a couple of weeks ago. And there's actually some players who were trying to figure out how they could write a letter to the NCAA expressing their concern. But here's the problem. They want to try and remain anonymous because they're concerned that all of a sudden maybe a university would say, hey, if you're that worried about this, then just don't even play. We can go ahead and quarantine you and you don't even have to be a part of this.
Rob Zatechka will tell us more about COVID and football and the Nebraska offensive line next.
And we're back
Fellas, think we could listen to the radio
on Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery.
Yes! That's awesome!
Back with you at Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. We say hi to a Husker Hall of Famer, All-American, and part of that vaunted pipeline, 1994 national champion. Rob Zatechka with us. Dr. Rob joins us. Rob, how's your weekend? You doing okay? Thanks for a few minutes.
It was a nice one. We got a cabin up by North Bend, Nebraska.
Oh, nice.
So we were up there doing some, I call it yard work, but it's like shoveling sand from one place to another. It's just one of those sand pits right off the Platte River. Nothing fancy, but it's kind of a nice little escape every so often.
Hey, and you can get to the cabin, man. You put your feet up, soak the sun in.
You feel like you went someplace, but you don't have to travel that much to do so.
Well, Rob, I want to have you put on your surgical hat real quick, and let's talk a little bit here about what's been going on in college football before we talk offensive line and position groups for Nebraska. I want to kind of get your take on just your comfort level and just your outlook with college football 2020. You've had a number of programs, including Nebraska, and Nebraska's been really smart. I mean, I think they've handled things well. They have staggered kids coming in. At the same time, you look at K-State, they've had a spike in cases. Oklahoma State, Texas, LSU, Clemson. I mean, you see COVID-19 cases popping up all over the country and increasing around the country. Are you pumping the brakes on your optimism that we'll have a season? Are you thinking things are okay? Where are you at right now from a medical standpoint?
I guess I've always had kind of a cautious optimism. Now, at the same time, too, again, you do look at kind of some of these test cases where you mentioned a number of them. I know like Clemson and LSU are a couple of the big programs where they've had the spike of cases within guys on the team. Now, it doesn't seem like, at least from what's hitting the media, it doesn't sound like there's been a lot of severity to them. So it's not like you're seeing, hey, we've got 21 or 23 cases and 10 of them are in the hospital and 5 of them are in the ICU. You're not hearing that. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I truly expect these numbers to increase. And when you look at COVID, it's kind of one of these situations where you put a group of people in a bit of a smaller proximity, and that's where you see the big uptick in cases. Food processing plants, the meatpacking plants in Nebraska, the nursing homes, things like that. That's where you see these big explosions of cases. When you see people in large group gatherings, that's where you see the explosion in cases. All it takes is, man, you get 1 or 2 positives in a group of 100 guys. It's going to be hard to shut that off. And now I think Nebraska's done a good job with it. I would like to think these schools where you're seeing the big numbers popping up, like Clemson's the one that everybody kind of keeps going back to, you would hope that they had same or similar precautions in place, and it was purely just kind of a happenstance that all it took was one exposure, and then it spreads to 20, 30, 40 guys all of a sudden. I think Nebraska's done it right. I think they've tried to do it right. But in truth, the reality is all it takes is for one guy to bring that virus in, and all of a sudden you've got 20 guys same boat as with these other schools that have had the outbreaks. In terms of how it's going to play out long term, man, we just don't know. This is still kind of in terms of the knowledge base, this is still kind of a day by day, week by week in terms of how it's playing out. I'm still fairly optimistic, but you are seeing an uptick across the country as all these different states kind of start relaxing restrictions and start opening back up again. And the question will be how many people are severely affected and how much is this going to actually affect the healthcare system. The original flattening the curve, it wasn't necessarily meant to prevent people from getting infected, period. It was meant to, hey, let's slow the rush on the healthcare system so we don't overwhelm it all at once. I'll be curious to see if that happens, if we get this big spike in cases as we reopen and you get that overwhelming of the healthcare system. And right now, so far, we've been okay, but there's still a lot of unknowns, and that absolutely applies to how this is going to affect sports going forward this fall.
Rob Zatechka is with us, Husker standout All-American, and Dr. Rob Zatechka. It's one thing to be infected. It's another thing to, God forbid, you're in the hospital in intensive care. I mean, that's very scary, and it's unfortunate that some folks have had to deal with that. It just takes that one interaction like you touched on, and it sounds like down in Manhattan for K-State with them as an example where you go to one party and next thing you know there's 15 guys on the team that have it. The other side of this, Rob, folks are going to get infected. Kids are going to get this. It's not great to get, but if you're going to get it, is it better for college football for kids to get it now versus as we are trying to inch closer to kickoff in September?
If you frame it in the light of
let's get a season in.
Going to happen. Yeah, if we're going to go through this reopening, if we're going to give this a try this year in 2020, if we're going to try and see if we can't put these sports seasons out there, I would say it's a lot better. Let's test run it now and see what happens. Is there going to be a degree of herd immunity that builds up? Do you catch this, get antibodies, and then you're going to have this degree of immunity? Now, those are still questions that don't have a great answer. Right. In truth, it probably does confer some degree of immunity, but at the same time, they're also finding that antibody levels tend to drop actually surprisingly quickly with this particular virus. It's not something where the antibodies stick around. And when you look at places that have done a wide-scale reopening, Sweden's a great test case country because they didn't do a lot of restrictions from the get-go, and for a country of its size, they had tons of numbers of cases. It's still a little bit questionable how much immunity actually gets conferred by those antibodies that your body creates to this virus. And so the ideal would be we do this, bunch of young, healthy guys get it, knock on wood, nobody's injured or severely affected by it. They get over it, and we roll on into the football season with this huge amount of herd immunity amongst college athletes. I mean, that would be the ideal case. We don't know if that's going to happen yet, though. We don't have a test case for this. It's the line that kind of gets used frequently, and there's a lot of truth to this, is we're flying the airplane while we're building it. And that's what we're going to have to find out with this is, are we going to run through the next couple of months here, end of June, July, early August? I will be shocked if pretty much every sports team doesn't come down with a large number of cases. Right. I just don't see that not happening. And the idea would be, it's like, well, let's see if that happens. We get through it, and then we play on into the fall after everybody's recovered. Right. And that, like I said, that would be the ideal situation.
Rob, we'll get to football. I want one more medical thought from you. Rob Zatechka with us, Hail Varsity Radio. You've been in medicine a long time, and when this first came on the radar, what was your reaction? Like, I remember with when March hit, right? I'm getting ready for state tournament games, and oh no, right? I mean, the United States comes to a screeching halt. UNMC, the medical community in Nebraska you're a part of, is phenomenal. So I wasn't like super worried. Maybe I'm just overly optimistic, but you as a medical practitioner, man, as a guy that's done the school, you know the science, you're educated, you provide care to people. What did you think when here's this virus from China that's rolling in?
I was, initially it was a little. The initial hope was that this would be something like the like the first SARS, like the SARS 1 outbreak several years ago. And then you had the MERS virus outbreak, and those were actually very, very lethal viruses. So those, truth be told, they kind of killed you before you had a chance to spread it.
Okay.
When you look at the numbers nationwide, but worldwide as well, that SARS-1 outbreak, I'd have to go back and look for the exact numbers, but I think there was just shy of 10,000 total cases worldwide. And that was a huge deal at the time, and partly because it was so fatal. I mean, it had about a 10% fatality rate. So if you got it, you had about a 1 in 10 chance you're going to die. So, but it was very localized in certain locations, very little spread, and then it was kind of poof. It was one of those things that just kind of went away. Same thing with MERS, which affected even fewer people. I think that was around 4,000 or 5,000 total cases worldwide. The hope was that this was going to be something like this. Hey, this is going to hit this really set group of people, a set defined population here or there, and then it's going to kind of poof, sort of disappear, and hopefully we don't see this crap again for several decades. And this has not proven to be like that. This has been much more like your standard influenza A, influenza B that kind of comes around, hits all populations to some degree, and then lingers for months. And that's kind of what we're seeing with this. And so it kind of, I was, like I said initially, I was kind of optimistic this was going to be something where when this popped up in March, it was one of those like, whoa, we need to shut everything down and we need to do it now. And hopefully by May, maybe June at the latest, this thing's going to be gone. That hasn't happened. So it's disappointed to say the least. And I think from a medical standpoint, hugely disappointed in terms of how this has affected the worldwide population. At this point in time, and this is kind of I don't mean to be sort of doom and gloom on this, I don't see, and I don't think most of the experts see, a defined endpoint. And that's kind of the scary thing with this, is that you talk to most of the infectious disease experts, the epidemiologists, there's really not a good, hard, solid, defined endpoint. And that's why I think getting a vaccine out is going to be kind of a very important aspect to this, is because one of the things that I think really lends to influenza A and B having kind of that defined quote-unquote flu season is because so many people do get a flu shot or get a flu vaccine every year. You do have a little bit of a true herd immunity from that. Now, that being said, influenza still kills anywhere from 30 to 70,000 Americans every year. And so it's still a pretty bad disease, although it kind of gets short shrift in terms of how people view it. But we have a little bit of a defined start and a season of influenza. We don't have that with this yet. And so that's always a little disconcerting.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Rob, going to switch to football. Nebraska has a lot of experience back on the offensive line. Hymas, options at left guard. There'll be a position battle there. Juergens at center. What's Matt Farniok looking at moving into to guard. You played tackle. I'm sure you've spent a little time at guard in your career, in your different spots in your career, but give me a thought what Matt's up against. Now that he can't do it, it's just a different look. And then also, what's the learning curve for Bryce Benhart or a Turner Corcoran at the right tackle spot?
At least as far as moving to guard, I mean, Farniok, he started, I thought it was as a redshirt freshman.
I think you're right.
He played a few games at guard as a redshirt fresh. He's been there before, so this isn't going to be completely foreign to him. I think in terms of his overall skill set, I think guard's a little bit of a more natural position for him. I think he's one of those guys who he'll always be he's a serviceable right tackle. It's not one of these, oh yeah, this guy's got that spot locked down and this is a great right tackle. This is the next Zach Wiegert at right tackle. That's not Farniok. He's serviceable at right tackle. I think some of his lateral movement and his ability to take on kind of the good combo defensive ends, the big guys like Epinesa from Iowa, those guys that have that nice combination, that 6'6", 280, 290, but can still move. He struggles with those guys. You give him the 6'3", 240-pound defensive end, he's going to be fine. You give him the 6'4", 320-pound defensive end who's maybe not a super fast guy, he's going to be fine. You give him that prototypical Bosa, Epinesa, NFL caliber defensive end, which, I mean, obviously those guys give everybody trouble, but he's going to struggle with that a little bit. I think you move him into guard, and where that lateral movement doesn't have to be as big of an issue, you've got less space to cover. I think he's going to do much better at that spot. For a guy like Benhart, you got a guy who's been primarily a tackle, and I think it's a much more same with Cork, much more natural offensive tackle. I think they're used to moving in space. I think they got a little bit better range, a little bit longer arms. When you think of some of those physical attributes, I'm not saying Farniok's not a great athlete. I think he's an outstanding athlete. I think Benhart's a better athlete. Wow. I think for a guy his size, I think Benhart moves better. I think he's got better lateral movement. I think he has a little bit better overall feet than Farniok has, and I think that's going to make him better suited to hold down that tackle spot. Corcoran, truth be told, outside of some all-star game film and then like the huddle films, I haven't watched him as much as I've watched Benhart. And when you look at Benhart, you got a guy who ended up getting some pretty solid game time last year. I'm a huge fan of the 4-game rule for people being able to redshirt. I think that's the greatest thing ever. We can go back and look and see how Benhart did last year, and I thought he held his own. And so for a true freshman last year to be able to do that in limited game time, I thought that was pretty impressive. I'm excited to see what a guy like him could do. You look at that other guard spot where you're probably going to have, initially it's going to be Wilson and Hickson, I think, fighting it out for that one. I think Hickson might actually have the edge there a little bit in terms of both size and technique. But don't sleep on Ethan Piper either. I mean, you got a guy.
What do you like about Ethan? I mean, because people kind of rave about him.
I think, it's kind of the Benhart thing.
Okay.
I think he's a little bit better natural athlete, and I think he has a little bit better raw size and strength.
Okay.
When I watch what he's able to do, when you watch him play, his natural strength is just better. I've watched him, and when you see clips of him, again, and a lot of it's with Piper, it's kind of like the huddle film, that kind of stuff. It's interesting to me because when I see him get out of position where maybe, he hit a guy, his technique wasn't perfect, maybe he didn't have his shoulders low enough. Maybe he didn't get as good a hip and knee bend on a particular play. You'll see him able to compensate with just kind of raw strength. And so he's got kind of that as a backup, where a guy like Hickson, he's a big, strong kid. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we're kind of splitting hairs here. I mean, when you're talking 300-pound weightlifters, they're all big, strong guys. It's just on occasion when I saw Hickson or Wilson get out of position, you'd see him get beat more frequently than if I saw like a guy like the tape I've watched of Piper. I've watched him get out of position, and all of a sudden he'll just manhandle a guy with raw strength and raw athleticism. And that's something I saw with Juergens as well, too, is that he was able to compensate for a lot of inexperience just by the fact that he's a really, really explosive athlete. Same thing with Piper, same thing with Benhart. It's that those guys who can kind of, you know what, he didn't have the best technique on that play, and he still beat his guy just because he's kind of a freak of nature athlete.
Rob Zatechka with us on Hail Varsity. Rob, no, last thought here on the O-line. As a collection, do you feel pretty good about this group? I mean, could it be the strength for Nebraska this year on the offense?
Boy, I don't know. And the reason I say that is that, again, I think in terms of personnel, we're moving towards, quote-unquote, the right personnel. I think we're moving towards the right talent level. When I look at these guys, it reminds me a lot of what we had on the offensive line back in 91, 92.
Okay.
Which, in reality, I think you had some great players. Now, we also had guys like Will Shields, who are college and NFL Hall of Famers, too, and Zach Wiegert and Brendan Stye and Aaron Graham. And you had a whole slew of guys who were true All-Americans and NFL and future NFL guys, so it's a little bit different. But when I look at 91, 92, the thing I saw was you had a lot of redshirt freshmen, redshirt sophomores that were stepping up, and that's kind of what gelled into those offensive lines of 94, 95, 6, 7, 99, et cetera. 91 was still a little bit of a, hey, we think we've hit on something here personnel-wise, but it still took a couple of years for that to kind of gel. And I think that's where I look at with these guys right now. If you want a comparison, that's kind of what it looks like to me in my head, is that, okay, they're getting the personnel they need. They're getting the people in the spots they need. They're getting the talent level they need. I still think this group's probably another year or two away from being something special.
Rob Zatechka with us. Rob, this was awesome, man. Thanks for checking in on the offensive line, and thanks for your medical expertise and thoughts on college football and COVID moving forward. We'll get to football season soon enough, man, and we'll get caught up again. How's that sound?
Absolutely.
Gotta love the good doctor, Dr. Rob Zatechka, great player for Nebraska and esteemed member of the medical community up in Omaha. Great insight from him on what we're up against with COVID and just his take on it, and then great expertise and thoughts on the O-line. I mean, something's brewing. And he's so right about when can this line gel. You're still working on a couple of starter spots, but overall, that talent level's at such a high level. We'll wind down hour one next.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Pretty awesome scene on NASCAR. Their race yesterday postponed due to weather, moved today, and everybody on the track walking next to, behind, in front of Bubba Wallace, a sign and show of solidarity. Some thoughts from Marty Smith coming up on NASCAR's search for the culprit who left that noose in Bubba Wallace's garage. We'll spend some time on that. Charlie McBride's 10 minutes away. May get into some NFL as well on Dak Prescott and the Cowboys. Reminder, 1 out of 3 fatal crashes involves an impaired driver. Driving drunk, buzzed or high, never acceptable. Law enforcement officers working around the clock to stop with sobriety checkpoints and saturation patrols. As a driver, make that correct choice. A non-alcoholic drink or a pre-selected designated driver. Be smart. Start the conversation. Who's Driving Home? Brought to you by the Nebraska Department of Highway Safety Office. Real good long-form chat with Rob Zatechka. His take on things medically with football, COVID, and the forge forward so a 2020 season gets in. His outlook, and then some great thoughts just on what you have in a guy like Ethan Piper at left guard, what you're getting back with Hickson and Bo Wilson, Farniok's skill set and high-level athleticism at right guard, and, of course, Benhart, what wowed him in that short window of 4 games last season, and even Turner Corcoran, a couple of high-level athletes. So the next thing here is you've got the bodies, and I know Hymas and I know Farniok are 2 seniors, but long-term projection, Rob Zatechka kind of compared him to how that O-line built 91, 92, and then you know what happened with 93 through 95, right? You had the pipeline, get a couple of years together, and then you had Aaron Graham remaining from that 94 pipeline. You had 4 new starters, but man, were they ready to be an incredible offensive line on that 1995 football team. Coach Austin's got a lot of talent to work with, and I think he's putting some good work in with those kids. They're getting the athletes and the recruits they want. Now they're going to get the development and coaching, and I think brighter days ahead for Nebraska's O-line in the Big Ten. That's been a long time coming, probably since back to the Searles O-line.
And the interesting thing to me, I don't want to look too far ahead, but Turner Corcoran played the first couple spring practices at guard. Mm-hmm. That's where they had him. So he came in as a tackle. Now they're at guard. So it kind of begs the question, is he going to be maybe a left tackle down the road? Is he going to be a right guard? Because if you get, 2 years down the line, you got Ethan Piper left guard, you'd assume, Cam Jurgens center. Mm-hmm. You're going to have Bryce Benhart right tackle. And then you have Turner Corcoran either right guard or left tackle, which it pretty much leaves one hole on the line where you need somebody to step up and fill it. But the line looks good for the future. It looks like there's promise there.
No, it does. And I think think of the kids that are on the board right now that have verbally committed on the offensive line.
Yeah, Prochazka and Lutovsky.
For 2021. We'll tell you about a new commit from Iowa Western Community College. Greg Smith is all over that. Another defensive back for Coach Fisher's room. Pretty long and lanky dude. Moore is his last name, and looks pretty nice. Pretty nice addition for Nebraska. I'm all good with going JUCO route, man, if you can get the frame you want and the seasoning you like. Good on Nebraska. We'll know more. We'll talk with Charlie McBride, get his take on what a senior season could look like for Ben Stille. And more thoughts here from Mr. Blackshirt. A Monday with Charlie next hour, 2. Hail Varsity, presented by the Nebraska Lottery.
Welcome to Hail Varsity Radio, the voice of Husker Nation. Insight, opinion, expertise, with the biggest and best names talking Nebraska across the state. Join the show on Twitter at Hail Varsity and at Schmidt_radio. Call in at 402-466-ESPN or 1-800-825-5865. Here's Chris Schmidt.
Back with you, it's Hour 2. It's Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Charlie McBride here shortly. Mondays with Charlie. Coming up, Rob Zatechka, Husker standout, and Dr. Rob. Thoughts on football and COVID and dealing with that as you move forward with a number of positive tests around different college football communities. NASCAR thoughts with Bubba Wallace, and NASCAR in search of finding the culprit who left a noose in Wallace's garage. 466-3776, 466-3776, 800-825-5865. Darius Moore, the newest commit for Nebraska football. He's a walk-on. He'll get to campus this summer. He's a defensive back out of Iowa Western Community College. And Moore is 6'2", 180, and really good length. We've all kind of paid attention to Iowa Western. Their college football program's really solid. And for Nebraska to get a guy that is from that school and able to kind of make the cut. I mean, Nebraska is not just taking everyone and their buddies to walk on. It's a position of need because, as you've heard Nebraska folks say for a long time, and Barry Alvarez say, quite frankly, the walk-ons are are your erasers in the program if you make a misstep or a guy's just not able to develop, or there's an issue with contributions by a scholarship guy. You pray that you get a guy that's a Makovica or an I.M. Hip or a Jared Tomich, right, that are scholarship level dudes that end up walking on for whatever reason, and they thrive and end up not only contributors but all conference performers. So we'll see if we can't get a hold of Charlie McBride. What's the latest here?
I've tried his home phone and his cell phone, and I've gotten answering machine on both.
Okay, so maybe we get Coach McBride here in a little bit. I hope that works.
Yeah, I was looking forward to an update in the weather up in Michigan today.
Well, I'm guessing it's sunny and beautiful. So, have you tried Mrs. Blackshirt?
I have not.
Yeah, do
that one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that would be good. So we'll try Charlie McBride. Derek Peterson's going to join us here in a little bit, and we're not far removed from the Zoom meeting with Coach Frost and what Nebraska has in store for them. First and foremost, you pray that the kids are healthy and safe and that there's no outbreak or issue with COVID. We told you about what's going on with Kansas State and Clemson and LSU. So right now, Nebraska's offensive line is one thing to really look forward to for this 2020 season. You have a good situation where you got some time with a Benhart, and he got those 4 games, and you heard Rob Zatechka touch on just how well Benhart performed in his 4 games. Now, you don't get the spring practices. You don't get the time for him to further that development. That's a tough situation. That furthers his ability to get the audibles, understand what's going on, and apply that in real time when you're on the field through more practices. Get to bowl games, yeah, that'll happen soon for Nebraska football, we all think. When it comes to applying what you had that little cup of coffee with, in-game action, you want to stack it with practices. But so far, so good when you look at a guy like Benhart. His little foray into right tackle, even at a super young age, you still keep that red shirt, and that right side could be pretty devastating. I like what Nebraska has potentially on the left side. They got to settle in as to who can win that left guard. Above all, I mean, you got to love what Nebraska potentially has depth-wise. And they're high on Brant Banks on the left side. Hickson responded really well after kind of a stumble and a misstep where he wasn't playing as well. He responded well. You got to love his character with that. Bo Wilson's played a lot of football, and you heard Rob Zatechka describe Ethan Piper's upside ceiling strength is at a very, very high level. Juergens, big time. And then I want to talk a minute here about your buddy Brock Bando, because I know Brock played with you at Southeast for a little bit before going to IMG and then ended up in Lincoln. And I thought Brock did a really nice job when asked to come in on the outside. He has played some tackle. He's back at a projected guard spot. Tell me what you think of Brock here behind Farniok, because Brock's a junior, right? Mm-hmm. So I think what you're going to see the 5 best from Austin moving forward, clearly. But then the hope is to get more in-game work for these guys. Start being up on teams. Let's hope, if you're a Nebraska fan, where you can get some of the backups in and they can get some more time. With Brock kind of focusing on that right guard spot, that's another option behind Farniok.
I think people forget Brock as a hometown kid. It's not that Brock was here for a couple years, went to Southeast, and went to IMG. I mean, he was raised outside Lincoln, just outside Lincoln, and lived most of his life here, went to IMG for that college recruiting attention, and still picked Nebraska over schools like Vanderbilt in Florida and a lot of good Southern schools. So I think people forget that. I mean, he was a pretty touted recruit around here, and when he came in, I think he had some definitely physical development to do, and you see the move to guard as opposed to tackle, the lateral quickness. I don't think it was always there. But Brock really impressed me in his few games that he got in last year. I know he started the second half against Minnesota, as well as getting some playing time against Rutgers, I know, a lot towards the end of the season. He impressed me. But that left guard battle just in general is going to be fun because you got multiple hometown kids battling out. Trent Hickson's from just south of Omaha. Scott, yeah. And then you have Brock Bando playing there too. So I'm personally excited for this left guard battle because it's really anyone's job to be had. I know Bo Wilson's going to have to move from right to left. That's more difficult than I think a lot of people give that credit for.
You got to learn the steps and the movements.
It's completely flipping your body movement. Instead of taking a left step, you're not taking a right step, or vice versa. I'd say, I guess I have limited upper level offensive line experience, but in my experience, moving from left tackle to left guard is a lot easier than moving from left tackle to right tackle.
Yeah, I mean, to completely flip your movements is pretty tough. We'll see if we can't run Charlie down. We'll have more thoughts on NASCAR. Derek Peterson's coming up. So our friend Bill Bender has put out a list here when it comes to pressure and the dreaded hot seat. College football coaches facing the hottest seats and the most pressure in 2020. So when you use the term hot seat, it means that you better win or you're done. And when it comes to pressure here, there's a difference between pressure and hot seat. You've got some programs that now have coaches that have been at their new school for a couple of 3 years. And Scott Frost is a part of that group. So is Coach Herman down at Texas, right? Those are the two that you think of. And you want to see if your program's going in the right direction. And listen, the honest-to-God truth is this. Not everybody is going to pull a Saban where you win it in year 3. Not everyone's going to pull a James Franklin where it pops. Honestly, and as good as Franklin and Penn State have been with their defense and their offense and finding skill guys and how quickly Penn State's resurrected post-Joe Pa. Okay, I mean, we're 9 years removed from that joke, from that coach, that joke, that program, Sandusky, all of that. They got lucky with the mid-major high, not mid-major, but the holding pattern hire of Bill O'Brien, who wanted to go to the NFL. He loaded Penn State up and went hit on all those recruits in a limited recruiting cycle. The Saquon Barkleys of the world, okay, or the Godwins, or pick some of the guys you watch on Sundays from Penn State in the NFL during the time O'Brien was there, or that Franklin inherited. Now, Franklin went out and has made his own hay. He's done very, very well. But if they don't get that blocked kick in return for a touchdown and upset number 1 Ohio State, they're probably a little bit better than their 7-6 number Franklin's first 2 years. But it took an improbable collapse by Ohio State, and Penn State had a lot to do with that for them to springboard and go win the Big Ten and finish 11-2 and go to a Rose Bowl and lose in a shootout to a really good USC team. I mean, Urban and Saban are it. I mean, Dabo was still teetering in year 3. Not that he wasn't the guy, but Clemson didn't become Clemson until year 5, year 6, okay? Where they're knocking on that playoff door. Look at Michigan State. Case in point, how long it took D'Antonio to build up. And Nebraska's still in the building process here, but when it comes to facing pressure and the hot seat, there is a difference. The pressure is, all right, you've been here 2 years. What's year 3 look like? And I think with Nebraska and what Rob Zadiska was telling us earlier, great. You've got returning starters. You've got some names you know. Good. The offensive line should be better. Nebraska should be able to run the football. Nebraska should be able to protect their quarterback. Great. You have a slew of receivers. Wonderful. But it doesn't just click and happen. There's still some work to do on the offensive line. But when it comes to hot seat and coaches, I absolutely believe that Clay Helton is on the hot seat. If they're 2-2 by week 5, he's gone. Kevin Sumlin, man, he did well at Houston. He did great with Johnny Football. He's been a mess wherever he's gone. Will Muschamp, I mean, they're still trying to find the next Spurrier down there. And then Chip Kelly. And things, it's been insult to injury with Chip because his players don't even really, it looks like playing for the guy. I mean, he's 7-17, and the offense hasn't been. So when it comes to coaches that aren't on the hot seat, but there's kind of a prove-it type mentality, and you heard Lars Anderson talk about this with us last week or a couple weeks ago. When it comes to pressure, there is pressure on Tom Herman. Tom Herman was 8-5. That's coming off a 10-win Sugar Bowl win over Georgia. They fell down. They're still chasing Oklahoma, and Texas has 11 losses by 8 points or fewer under Herman. Yeah. Can you win close games? And Frost is next on this list, and you've got the close losses for Nebraska. We detailed those. Vogues has detailed those from HailVarsity.com. Nebraska's 9-15. And then you look at somebody else in your own division at a program you don't think is better than you if you're a Nebraska fan. But damn, how good was Minnesota last year in year 3? You've got that just in your own division, year 3. So there's some pressure there to take a step forward, get to a bowl game, and win some close games. Because the Big Ten isn't getting any easier.
If you go back to this time last year, there was the same talk of, well, prove it with P.J. Fleck at Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And I encourage people.
And he sure as hell proved it for a year.
Yeah, last night I went and watched that Nebraska 2018 game against Minnesota.
They
killed them, blowout. And you go look at that depth chart, and there are still players who made good contributions to that Minnesota team last year that played in that game. You got Antoine Winfield, you got Rashad Bateman, you got
guys
Tyler
all
Johnson.
Off the place on Sundays now.
Yeah, guys all off the play on Sundays, and they struggled in that Nebraska game.
It just took a year.
It just took another year of development.
Well, Fleck blew out his defensive coordinator.
Are you making the comparison?
No,
Nebraska
I am
bringing
not.
In a new offensive coordinator?
No, I'm saying Fleck changed defensive coordinators. Mm-hmm. Either before the Nebraska game or after the Nebraska game or shortly thereafter. And Minnesota's season was so different with momentum because they won at Wisconsin, okay? They won their bowl game. They finished with 7 wins in year 2. And then this last year was really nice. They didn't finish as strong, but they had a tougher schedule down the stretch. They still got the home win, the home validation win over Penn State. They won a big game against a really good Penn State team last year. They got worked by Wisconsin. They lost to Iowa, but they still won their bowl game against somebody from the SEC. Was it Auburn? I don't remember. But they went 11-2. They crushed Nebraska. So, yeah, that year 3 payoff is very real. Jimbo Fisher's on this list. Manny Diaz is kind of in that prove-it category. He had 1 year with the Canes. 6-7 was his record. Miami just keeps botching their hires. They've got a bunch of dudes down there that can play ball, and they never, ever stick the landing with the hire. They just don't. They haven't. They've been searching for the right guy, and it's been a revolving door. Jimbo Fisher and A&M's 1-7 against top 10 teams the last 2 seasons. Again, there's your theme when it comes to prove it. It's not that you're not building the program the right way. It's not that you're not recruiting at a high level. It's how are you doing against your peers, and are you winning big games? You can't leave off a prove-it list from our friend Bill Bender at the Sporting News without Jim Harbaugh. So the prove-it coaches for 2020, Frost and Harbaugh and Jimbo Fisher and Tom Herman, those are the guys that are on the list along with Manny Diaz. That's fair.
You got to think Tom Herman's probably got the hottest seat of any of those guys.
No.
He's got Sam Ehlinger, a Heisman candidate, and he went 8-5 last year.
Dude, listen, the one thing that you got to give these guys, the difference between the fan base screaming for better results in a quicker timeline versus the reality of what you have, what you're inheriting, and what you're trying to build. You can't keep hitting reset. These guys have time, and they'll see what they can do this next season.
Chime in 402-466-ESPN or email the show, Chris@HailVarsity.com.
Just try me.
Back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Great to have you back in Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbal. We say hi to Derek Peterson from HailVarsity.com and magazine at Dr. PDHV on Twitter's where you find him. Derek, what's up, man? How are you?
All right. I'm driving, been driving all day, but listening to Elton John before you called me, so I can't complain.
Good enough. What we got the greatest hits going? Do we just have a mix on your phone? What kind of Elton are we tapping into?
Well, I mean, right now I'm just going to sound like basic because I was listening to Rocket Man, but we've had a wide-ranging playlist over the last 5.5 hours that I've been driving.
Where do you rate Candle in the Wind?
I certainly prefer 5,000 Candles in the Wind from Parks and Rec. If they made that into an actual song, I would prefer it more than the original.
Oh, come on now. Candle in the Wind doesn't just get you?
5,000 Candles in the Wind gets me.
Okay. Well,
Bye-bye, Lil Sebastian.
Sure. I can tell you more about Elton.
I kid you not, I was too from belting that line. Bye-bye, Lil Sebastian. Gets me every time.
Well, good. We'll tear up together. Okay.
Are you not a Parks and Rec fan?
Junior's gotten into it. I have seen a little bit of it. It's not that I dislike it. I just haven't locked in on it. I'm sure it's money.
You don't know what I'm talking about.
No, I'm following along, trying to. So I've appreciated your nice work with HailVarsity.com, as always, sir. And personnel decisions. You posted this story yesterday. And, when you look at the offensive line here, Hymas is kind of your known, and Juergens' upside and kind of the way he finished out last season is very encouraging. We talked with Rob Zadiska last hour, former Husker O-lineman, and so he gave some pretty good insight to not just the depth Nebraska has, but also what they have for those position battles. And what's your take on left guard here? If you were to give me a favorite and a dark horse, where would you go with your picks? Because you got three good candidates there for that left guard spot next to Hymas and Juergens.
Yeah, well, Rob's probably going to give you a little bit better analysis than I'll give you, but the three guys that I looked at in that piece that I wrote for my Monday column was I maybe it's nothing. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but having Matt Farniok over on the right side, taking right guard, I just kind of wonder what the plan is with Bo Wilson, because I didn't think coming out of last season that any guy on the offensive line was going to have a set in stone starting position at the beginning of fall camp. Maybe Cam Juergens is the closest, Brendan Hymas is the closest, but their guard play last year, it was okay. It wasn't great. Not to the point where somebody like Bo, who is a senior, is going to play because he's a senior. And I think they liked Trent Hickson. Obviously liked him enough before the season even started to put him on scholarship. He had that spot locked up before the season started. Well, before the season started, and so I just kind of wonder. It's obviously those two guys because those are the two returning starting guards. If Farniok sticks at right guard through fall camp and Benhart is able to win the job at right tackle, I don't know. Maybe Hickson is the favorite, and Bo is right there with him. I think Ethan Piper should be a wild card, a dark horse kind of guy, because if you just look at their usage, like I was thinking back to when I wrote my column, I was thinking back to Justin McGriff, and he comes to Nebraska, and after that first year, they're moving him to outside linebacker because this is before he transferred. They're moving him to outside linebacker because they're like, this is where you're going to be able to get on the field faster. That tends to be their kind of MO. They're not just like moving guys willy-nilly. If they're moving positions, it's because they think that they're going to be a better player and can get on the field faster at that new position. Case in point, Cam Juergens. So I wonder about Ethan Piper. He came to Nebraska as a defensive lineman, and they moved him to offensive line, and they knew that they were going to lose all three of their defensive line starters the next offseason. Like, they knew that the defensive line was going to be in a state of flux, and Tony Tuioti says he wants 8 guys on the defensive line. If you're moving Ethan Piper to the offensive line, it's because he's going to play, not because you're going to move him there and then you're going to bury him. because he probably might have played on the defensive line or at least been a rotation piece. So I wonder if maybe if he has a chance to crack the 2 deep with fall camp. Obviously, when you're talking about all the young guys, they would have needed spring ball. Like Turner Corcoran, I think on the first day after the first day of spring practice, I think it was either Frost or someone said that Corcoran was working as a backup guard. And maybe if they have spring ball, he has a chance to carve out a nice role for himself in the 2 deep. But without spring ball, Benhart, it's not. I don't think it's a given that Benhart wins right tackle. I think it's close. Like, I think it's pretty good odds that he's the right tackle, but it's certainly not a given. And I just think between Hickson and Bo Wilson, it's going to be an interesting battle. And the thing that I kind of wrote was Greg Austin said they're going to play the best 5 guys, and he says that a lot, and he said that since he got here, that they're just going to play the best 5 linemen. And I wonder how this loss of spring ball, this adjusted off-season and fall camp and preseason training, I wonder if that changes the best terminology to safest. Safest might be the senior and Bo Wilson just not going to make mistakes. I don't know. Left guard is going to be interesting.
From an outlook to where the O-line can be, can it be the best O-line Nebraska's had since Frost got here? Or, I mean, I think the best line they had was probably 18. There was some works in progress for last season. Can they take that step? Rob was wondering how quickly they can gel. And from a projection standpoint, as far as the timeline of where this line is now, he kind of compared it to some of the early 90s lines where they've got the athletes and the ball players and the talent. They just got to work together for some time because he thinks they could be really, really good.
Yeah, they could be. I mean, they have the guys. You have 2 seniors. You're going to have one on either side. You have a center that you feel is an award-winning kind of center in his future. And, I mean, they need them to be really good because winning in the Big Ten means winning in the trenches, right? Nebraska needs a better run game this year. So, I don't know. I think the offense is going to need time. Like, I think the offense is not going to come out against Purdue and look great. I don't think Purdue's offense is going to look great. I don't think many teams in the country are going to look great over the first couple of weeks, and Nebraska specifically. Like you said, they're going to need time to gel. And that offensive line, like, it's in a weird spot because they return all 5 starters from last year, but they're moving pieces around and they're in a little bit of flux, and you don't know who's going to be where. And, maybe it's an issue, or I shouldn't say issue. Maybe it's the state of flux that they're in impacts their cohesiveness on day one, on snap one, and maybe it doesn't. I don't know, but Nebraska probably needs them to be pretty good. And look, they feel good about where they're at. They feel good about the guys they have in the room. Greg Austin feels really good about guys like Benhart and Turner Corcoran, and they obviously love Brendan Hymas. Austin thought he could have been a draft pick. They're building, but one thing that Austin said at the roundtable and back in early March that has stuck with me is he talked about not having gaps on the O-line. And this is something that, like, you look at what Wisconsin does, where a guy comes into their program and then you don't hear about him for 3 years. Mm-hmm. And then when, the all-conference right guard graduates and goes to the NFL, you have a fourth-year junior that comes and takes his place and is immediately an all-conference caliber player because they were afforded the time to grow and mature. And Nebraska doesn't really have that luxury right now. That's where they want to get to. That's the end goal. But this year is going to be interesting because, they have a guy like Benhart who they think is going to be really, really, really good, and a guy like Cam Jurgens who they think is going to be really, really good. But they've kind of had a gap year, or a couple gap years, so to speak, in that they haven't had veterans that can afford those guys probably the time that they need to mature. And they're kind of having to learn on the fly. And if Benhart is the guy at right tackle, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that he has like some early season jitters in the same way that Juergens had. Juergens was on a different level because he had to snap as well.
Sure.
But you get what I'm saying.
Derek, I mean, the Big Ten up in the trenches is such a grind. We only got about 90 seconds here, so it's got to be pretty concise. But with just the depth behind these guys, I mean, you'll get injuries in Big Ten play with just how physical it is. Does Nebraska feel good about the depth behind guys like Juergens and behind Hymas and those guys?
I think they feel optimistic about where they're at, but the depth that they have doesn't have a ton of experience, right? Like you're talking about Ethan Piper and Brant Banks as a tackle, Will Farniok as a center. You're talking about like Brock Bando. Like these are guys that don't have a ton of playing experience, so they feel optimistic. But it's one of those things where, like, I mean, you would hope that you don't lose Cam Juergens to injury, and you would hope that you don't lose like Brendan Hymas to injury.
All right, Dr. Petey's with us. Derek Peterson hitting on the O-line, the depth, the talent, and where that line can be if we get a 2020 season. Are you in Oklahoma? Are you in Kansas? Are you just traveling around Nebraska? Where are you at now?
I am in Oklahoma, getting ready to get off the highway.
All right. Are you near Norman? Are you near the hometown?
I'm near Oklahoma City, so my wife and her sister are having a procedure in a couple weeks, and so I'm back to see her.
Well, hugs to everybody down there, brother. You stay safe and healthy and safe travels, man. Thanks for jumping on today.
Yeah, appreciate you having me.
All right, man. Be good. There he is, Derek Peterson. Good write-up. Catch his column, HailVarsity.com. Get the subscription if you whiffed on that for Father's Day. Apologies, but the yearbook will be in mailboxes and newsstands soon. Get the whole thing, yearbook, subscription, digital subscription, all of it. It's cheap. It's easy. It's wonderful. It's worth it if you're a Nebraska fan. We'll get into some Bubba Wallace, some NASCAR thoughts. Hail Varsity continues, presented by the Nebraska Lottery.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you, Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbal. Many thanks to Derek Peterson as he's traveling down to OKC. Good to hear from him. And thoughts on the O-line. Really want you to check out what Dr. Rob Zatechka had to say earlier. Hour one, the battle against COVID-19 if you're a college football program. Rob, of course, doctor and pretty smart dude when it comes to the medical community. And yeah, Rob knows his offensive line, so he gave us thoughts on that left guard battle and Ben Hart's emergence at right tackle and what Farniok can do. He was pretty complimentary of just what type of athlete Farniok is. 466-377-6800, 825-5865. No, some of you have been wanting to get in. We have been pretty loaded up the last hour and a half, so open phones here the next 20 minutes before we say goodbye to a Monday. So let's get into Bubba Wallace, and first and foremost, just how awesome the sight was at the race today in Talladega with NASCAR drivers and crew members, one and all, including the King Richard Petty, all in solidarity, all in uniformity, backing Bubba and walking next to, in front of, and behind him in his car as he was going around the track. The noose found in a stall of Bubba Wallace's garage in Alabama was horrific, was menacing. I don't know NASCAR, dude. I mean, I've seen it. I am not into it. It's not that it's a bad sport. It's just never captured my attention, and I don't really lock into it. If we do have to talk it, let's call Lars Anderson up because Lars covered it for 15 years and was a premier writer. Or I'll listen to Marty and McGee Saturday mornings, and that's kind of their wheelhouse because that's where they've done most of their ESPN work. So they are kind of the two I will at least entertain. And listen, this isn't to hate on NASCAR, but you have a perception in NASCAR, you have an issue in NASCAR, and you have the Confederate flag that's been very prevalent in NASCAR, and that's not fair to NASCAR fans. That's not fair to NASCAR drivers. That's not fair to NASCAR owners. But it's been the perception that it's a bunch of good old boys that hopes the South will rise again, and that's not an accurate stereotype or an accurate depiction of the folks that are a part of the sport, that cover the sport, that race, and that are fans of the sport. There's great people that are fans of NASCAR, and they're as pissed off that some a-hole left the noose in Bubba Wallace's garage as anybody. What can you do as you're trying to turn the page of this perception problem on top of the viewership numbers and attendance challenges with COVID? So this is insult to injury that someone on Sunday put a noose in Bubba's garage. The only black NASCAR driver you got. It's not been inclusive. It's not been an inclusive sport. They are working their butt off to try and be inclusive. And guess what? They were trying to be inclusive before they said no more Confederate flag. Guess what? They've tried to be more inclusive, working towards that before Mr. Floyd died. Okay, so NASCAR's been trying to have been proactive. Lars Anderson told us this a week ago. And now this. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I am kind of surprised, and I hope that they find this SOB, and it's Code Red time circa Full Metal Jacket with bars of soap and socks. And they treat this lowlife like a piñata. I hope that happens. Sorry, I shouldn't call for physical violence on people.
But I mean, the guy who did it pretty much called for physical violence on Bubba Watson.
Oh, completely.
Not Bubba
Wallace.
Wallace, excuse me. I said the golfer. But back to your point of just NASCAR's got a problem. I mean, look at it. They have 50 drivers pretty much in that top flight NASCAR, and they have one black driver. One.
Well, let's flip it around. If you're a black guy, I mean, there's a lot of things you can go do. Mm-hmm. You can go get a great job. You can find a sport you love. I wouldn't, if I'm a black guy, I'm not running to NASCAR to go be a driver.
Yeah, you can go find a sport that's more inclusive than NASCAR. That you're not the only black driver.
But NASCAR's now seeing former and current NFL guys. Now that the Confederate, by the way, it's like everywhere you feel like you turn, there's a stupid Confederate flag up. So that's not inviting for people of color. Now that stars and bars are gone, more African Americans, it sounds like, per Marty Smith's report, want to go attend because they love racing. They think it's cool. But this is very, very damaging. And you got to find something. Let's get a little audio here. This is the president for NASCAR, Steve Phelps, and what the plans are here to do once they find the perpetrator.
I can't speak for those on social media who would say that this is a staged event. I would say that is something that personally offends me. This is a terrible, terrible act that has happened, and for those that would think that this is staged, I don't even know where to go with that. Frankly, unequivocally, Liz, they will be banned from this sport for life.
So there was the social media commentary that, hey, well, is it like a Jesse Smollett thing? Did someone just plant this? And no is the answer. Last thought here from Steve Phelps.
There is no room for this at all, and we won't tolerate it, and they won't be here. I don't care who they are. They will not be here.
Here's Marty Smith. He was able to chime in with Greeny and Stephen A., and Marty's a guy that's been on our show before, big-time college football contributor, but a guy that's worked for NASCAR, and Marty is reporting on the scene that happened down at Talladega, They're searching for who committed this act.
Because of COVID-19, the garage area is roughly 1/3 or so of the amount of personnel you would typically see. It's about 16 people per team because of the COVID-19 protocol and restrictions. Fans are not allowed. This was not a situation where a fan might have meandered in and done this because there were no fans in the garage. So what you're looking at is you're looking at team members, you're looking at officials, you're looking at potential security, you're looking at maybe cleaning personnel that have access to these garage areas.
Do we have time? All right, more from Marty Smith.
And I will tell you that I spoke to a senior NASCAR official just a few moments ago, and they reiterated that statement. They're going to find who this person is. They're going to eliminate this person from the sport forever.
Good. No room for it. No need for it. Hate's awful. Intimidation. A death threat. Unacceptable. And NASCAR's got an opportunity here to respond the right way. Their drivers and their team members absolutely did already by showing solidarity and uniformity with Bubba.
Miss us?
Come here, brother. Give me a hug. Bring it in for the real thing.
We're on call for you. Catch the podcast at HailVarsity.com, the ESPN Lincoln app, or download them on iTunes.
Saddle up, partner.
Back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Okay, you've got some weather moving through the area. You've got a severe thunderstorm warning for Lancaster in effect till 6. Lancaster, Seward, Saline, Gage, Southwest Cass. And just a heads up, if you want updates for weather, you can text warning to 88474. Get your KFOR updates to your mobile device. Okay, if you're moving in 2020, West Blue Realty, they're the spot for you, man. Tom Luby, Kelly Hofschneider are incredible at what they do, and they can help find homes for you or sell what you're looking to get out of in Lincoln and surrounding communities. And when you mention Hail Varsity, they can provide you up to $1,000 on the closing of your next home purchase. Tom Luby, give him a shout at 402-540-3768. Kelly Hofschneider, 402-202-2312. It pays to work with West Blue, westbluerealty.com. Go see Tom or Kelly today, 1120 K Street, Suite 200. Let's hear a little bit more from Marty Smith on this Bubba Wallace reaction. And Bubba's been stand up about this. He has been brave to put the comment out he put out, because think about putting yourself in his shoes, how you're feeling, how angry you've got to be. And, oh, by the way, go race today. So good on the rest of the drivers in NASCAR with the show of solidarity and support and love they gave him by marching with him out on the track today. But if you're Bubba, man, I would lose it. I couldn't imagine. And I've never obviously dealt with this. And if you're Bubba, you're just trying to go to your job, kick butt and take names, and some freak show says, "Here, I'm gonna try and intimidate you."
Well, how terrifying is that? That somebody within another team essentially is saying that they want you dead.
Well, I don't know that it was somebody within another team. There's got to be footage. All right, let's play the longer Marty comment. Do we have time? No. Yeah. All right. Here's more from Marty.
Oh wait, no.
Okay. Well, let's get to the footage, the security stuff, because there's cameras everywhere, dude. There just is. You got to find. Somebody knows something, or there's an eye in the sky always to hopefully find this culprit.
There was a lot of speculation last night about whether or not a fan might have made his or her way in there. There were no fans. So I think that we can safely say that can be removed from the search and the equation. It's a brand new garage area that we're talking about.
Yeah, that was big with the way, and Vic's checking in. Vic, our friend out in Colorado, when it comes to NASCAR being welcoming. Yeah, NASCAR, their response is awesome. I mean, it really makes you proud. It sucks that they've got to do it. Busy show today, lots of football. We want you to check out Rob Zadis because sit down with us on the Husker O-line. Rob's also a doctor, so Rob will have a take on the COVID battle and what's the likelihood of getting football season in. We still feel pretty good about it, but you've had cases spike in different college football programs. So Rob Zatechka, Derek Peterson. Tomorrow, Mitch Krank, Husker tight end, will YouTube Tuesday, 82 Auburn. Mitch Sherman with us. Talk to you tomorrow at 4. Thanks.